Imagine just for a moment that you are standing in the absolute center of the modern world. Maybe it's Times Square in New York or Shibuya Crossing in Tokyo or, the financial district of London. Just picture it. It is loud. It is chaotic.
Mhm.
But it's also incredibly structured. You're surrounded by the absolute pinnacle of civilization, commerce, technology, noise, law, order. You have a job that you go to every day. You have a pension plan that is accruing interest. You have a reputation you've built over years. And you have a family network, a social safety net that covers your back. You are, by all modern definitions, safe. You are established.
It's the definition of stability. It's essentially everything we spend our entire adult lives working toward, that sense of knowing exactly where you fit in the machine.
Exactly. Now, I want you to imagine that in the middle of that rush hour, a voice cuts through the noise. And I don't mean a hunch or a feeling or a whisper in the wind. I mean a directive, a clear, unmistakable voice. And it tells you to drop it all. The pension, the apartment, the network, the reputation. It tells you to walk out of the city into the wilderness. No GPS, no hotel booking, no destination. Just go.
That is terrifying. To be honest, in a modern context, that isn't a career pivot. That's a psychological break. That is the moment people call for an intervention.
Or, depending on who you ask, it's the beginning of the most influential story in human history. Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we are turning our attention to a narrative that is, well, it's foundational. We're looking at a source text titled Faith in Filtros, or Faith Without Filters. It creates a very specific atmospheric reconstruction of the life of a man named Abram.
It is a fascinating document. What I appreciate about this particular source is that it really invites us to step back thousands of years to a time when the world looked very different, and to examine a singular moment that rippled out to shape civilizations. We are looking at the concept of the call.
And what I love about this source and why I'm so excited to unpack it with you is that it strips away that stained glass window effect.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We often see these figures, Abram, Sarai, as statues. They are marble, unmovable, stoic. They don't sweat, they don't doubt. But this text drags us right down into the dust and the heat. It makes the call of Abram feel dangerous again.
Dangerous is the right word, because we have to remember, this wasn't a story written in hindsight for the people living it. It was a real-time crisis. We are going to explore the world Abram left behind, which is crucial context, the psychology of this call, the often overlooked role of his partner Sarai, and the brutal reality of the journey itself.
We're going from the metropolis of Ur to the silence of the desert. It's a journey from absolute security to the impossible. So let's start where the source starts.
Yes.
Set the scene for us. We aren't starting in a tent in the middle of nowhere, are we?
No, and this is the first major misconception the source corrects. I think popular imagination tends to place Abram as a simple shepherd wandering around a field, but the text places him in Ur of the Chaldees. And the source uses these audio cues, dry earth, wind, epic strings, to set a mood. But historically, Ur was a powerhouse.
Right. This wasn't a backwater village. This wasn't a place you left because there were no opportunities.
Far from it. In the ancient world, Ur was New York City. It was a metropolis. It was a place of high civilization, complex commerce, and advanced bureaucracy. We're talking about a city with, running water systems, with written laws, with massive architecture like the ziggurats.
The source describes it as a place where tradition was law. I think that phrase is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Tradition was law.
It is a very potent phrase.
Let's unpack that a bit. What does life actually look like in a city where tradition is law?
It means your life is scripted before you're even born. In Ur, you didn't find yourself. You didn't take a gap year to backpack through Europe to discover your passion. You stepped into your father's trade. You worshipped your father's gods. You lived in your father's house. It was a world of walls, literally, the massive city walls that protected you from invaders, and metaphorically, the walls of expectation.
So high structure, high predictability.
And high security. That's the trade-off, isn't it? You give up autonomy, but you gain safety. The source mentions bustling markets, extended families, and a polytheistic environment. That's key. There were temples everywhere. A god for the sun, a god for the river, a god for grain, a god for fertility.
It's a crowded marketplace of deities.
It is. And in that system, religion is transactional. It's management. You pay the insurance premium, the sacrifice, and the god prevents your house from flooding. It's very logical, in a way. You manage the gods to maintain your safety. It is a system of control.
It's a control mechanism. If I do X, the universe does Y. I am safe.
Precisely. And that is why what happens next is so disruptive. In the middle of this noise, the commerce, the family obligations, the thousands of gods clamoring for attention, Abram hears a voice.
And the source is very specific here. It wasn't a feeling. It wasn't just a mood.
No, the text emphasizes clarity. It says God spoke. It wasn't a whisper in the wind or some indigestion-induced dream. It was an objective external command. And notice the singular nature of it. In a world of many gods, one voice speaks.
Which is a stark contrast to how we talk about callings today. We usually mean, I feel drawn to this, or this matches my passion. This was an interruption.
It was an invasion. It was a disruption of the status quo. And look at the command. It's a trifecta of loss. The source lists it out very clearly. Leave your land, leave your relatives, leave your father's house.
It's surgical.
It's total. I want to really dwell on those three things because we skip over them. Think about the ancient Near East context. First, leave your land. That is your economic engine. That is your property. That is your source of food and wealth.
Right.
Second, leave your relatives. That is your social security. That is your police force. That is your army. If you get into trouble, your clan protects you. If you leave them, you are vulnerable to anyone who wants to hurt you.
And a third one, leave your father's house.
That is your identity, your legal standing. You are Abram, son of Terah. If you leave your father's house, who are you? You are a nobody. You are a ghost.
So God isn't just saying, move to a new zip code. He's saying, strip yourself of everything that makes you a person in the eyes of your society.
He is asking Abram to strip himself of every layer of protection he has ever known. It's a move from absolute security toward the absolute unknown. That is the hook of this entire deep dive. We have to ask the question, why? Why would anyone do that?
That's the million-dollar question. The source calls it a call to the impossible. And I want to dig into the psychology of that, because human beings, we hate the unknown. We are wired for pattern recognition. We crave homeostasis.
We do. Biologically, we are designed to avoid risk. If you have a safe cave, you stay in the safe cave. You don't walk out into the dark where the tigers are. Abram is being asked to violate his survival instincts.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's the difference between walking on a paved road and stepping off a cliff in the hope that a bridge will appear. The source uses this analogy of leaving the security of the known for the destiny of the unknown. But let's be honest, destiny is a very abstract concept when you're leaving a warm bed.
It is incredibly abstract, and the source highlights a specific phrase in the command that makes it even harder. God says, go to the land I will show you.
Future tense.
Future tense, which implies, right now, I'm not showing you. You have to start walking before you get the map.
That is the opposite of a 5-year plan. We live in a world where we want the itinerary before we buy the plane ticket. We want the job offer signed before we quit the old one. We want to see the destination before we take the first step.
Exactly. We want guarantees. We want to minimize risk. But the source asserts a powerful theological point here. God's promises are not measured by time. They are measured by obedience.
Measured by obedience. Let's stop there. That shifts the metric of success entirely, doesn't it?
It does. It completely flips it. Usually we measure success by outcomes. Did you get the land? Did you get the money? Did the project work? In this framework, success is the act of leaving. The success is the trust itself. The outcome is God's responsibility. The walking is Abram's responsibility.
That is a hard pill to swallow.
It is counterintuitive. I mean, fundamentally, our whole world is built on verifiable results.
Right. Show me the data, show me the projection, and here, the only data point is the voice.
And the character of the one speaking. That's really all Abram has to go on. He has to believe that the source of this command is trustworthy enough to warrant this level of risk. This wasn't a call to a slightly better version of It was a call to something entirely different, something undefined. It was a call off the map of human experience, really.
So the risk involved is total, but the metric for success is internal. It is a call to leave it all, based solely on a promise. It's almost a suspension of logic in favor of relationship. He had to trust the speaker of the promise more than he trusted the evidence of his eyes.
Which brings us to a critical, often overlooked element of the story, which the source material highlights in Part 3. Because often this story is told as a solo mission, the man of faith standing alone on a mountain. But the source material is very clear. Abram was not alone.
Sarai.
Yes, Sarai, his wife.
The source is very careful to make a distinction here. It says she was not just support, she was a companion in faith.
That is a vital distinction. In the ancient world, and we have to be honest about the history here, women were often viewed through the lens of their relationship to men as property or simply part of the household. But the source elevates her role significantly. If Abram leaves, Sarai leaves. If Abram becomes a nomad, Sarai becomes a nomad.
They left everything together. Family, city, customs, security. I can't help but wonder about the conversations they must have had. The source mentions this journey was not merely physical, but spiritual, emotional, and transformative for both of them.
Imagine the trust Sarai had to have, not just in God, but in her husband's hearing of God.
That's a lot of pressure on a marriage.
Immense pressure. Imagine the conversation at the dinner table that night. Abram comes in and says, "We have to leave Ur." Sarai asks, "Where are we going?" And Abram says, "I don't know, but a voice told me to go."
I mean, in a modern context, that is difficult. That's a conversation that might end a relationship.
Right. And her sacrifice is, in many ways, just as profound. She's leaving her family, her female social networks, the security of her home. And in that culture, a woman's security was entirely tied to her male relatives and the stability of her city. To step out of that was to step into a place of extreme vulnerability.
So when the source calls her a companion in faith, it's not a passive title, it's an active one. She is a co-participant in this radical act of obedience.
Absolutely. She is a co-pioneer. But she goes. The source implies a shared sacrifice. They were co-pilots in the unknown. It recontextualizes the call of Abram as really the call of Abram and Sarai. They are uprooting their entire existence together.
And once they uproot, they hit the reality of the situation. Part 4 of our outline covers the journey through the desert. The romantic idea of leaving Ur fades pretty quickly when you're walking kilometers through the desert.
The physical reality is brutal. The source describes mountains, unknown rivers, and the wind of the desert. Every step was a physical struggle against the elements. This isn't a paved highway. This is rough terrain. You're dealing with finding water, finding food, protecting your livestock, protecting yourselves from bandits. It is a constant daily grind for survival.
And it wasn't just the elements. It was the internal dialogue. The source actually gives voice to these silent prayers. It imagines them asking, "Lord, where are we going?" And, "Lord, is this where you were showing me the land?"
That is deeply human. It shows that faith does not mean the absence of confusion. You can be obedient and still be bewildered. You can be walking in the will of God and still ask, "Are we there yet?"
And the source highlights God's patience. God guided every step, remaining patient despite the uncertainty of the travelers. It's a comforting thought that our confusion doesn't disqualify us from the journey.
And we cannot ignore the external conflict. The source explicitly mentions the social pressure. Relatives, neighbors, local leaders, they did not understand.
The questions they faced must have been relentless. Why abandon Ur? What hope is there in the desert?
From the perspective of Ur, Abram and Sarai were insane. They were abandoning civilization for nothing. They were throwing their lives away. Imagine the conversations with Terah, Abram's father, the family arguments, the friends who tried to talk them out of it.
It's the ultimate countercultural move. Everyone is moving to the cities for safety and opportunity. They're doing the exact opposite.
Which brings us to a key takeaway from the source. True faith manifests when no one else believes. It is easy to believe when everyone around you agrees. It is incredibly difficult to believe when you are the only one seeing the vision.
And that isolation breeds temptation. Part 5 of our discussion focuses on the temptation and the altars. The source describes the pull of the past.
It is the inevitable moment of fatigue. When the sun is hot, the water is low, and the destination is nowhere in sight, the memory of Ur begins to change. It stops looking like a cage and starts looking like a sanctuary.
Ur is safe. We have a home, food, protection. That's the voice of temptation. It's the temptation to settle for survival rather than significance.
Exactly. It's the logic of the known world reasserting itself against the promise of the unknown. And to overcome this, Abram had to actively remember the voice of God. The source says he had to remind himself that this was a voice that does not make mistakes.
And he had a strategy for this. The source calls it the strategy of altars.
This is fascinating. Every time he arrived at a new place, he built an altar. Now, we might think of altars as religious monuments, big stone structures meant to impress. But in the context of a nomad, these were piles of rough stones. They were simple, temporary in a sense.
The source notes they were not monuments of pride. They were acts of gratitude.
They were physical markers in the landscape. Each altar was a declaration saying, "Here I am, I listen to you, I trust." It was a way of claiming the territory spiritually before he possessed it physically. It was a reminder that he was not alone.
It's like leaving breadcrumbs of faith along the path. So when he looked back, he could see the history of his obedience.
Yes, and that prepared him for the moment when the promise was expanded. We move to part 6, the vision of stars and the covenant.
This is one of the most cinematic moments in the source material. God tells Abram to look at the sky and count the stars, if you can.
In the desert, away from the light pollution of the city he left, the stars would have been overwhelming. A sea of light. And the promise is specific. So shall your descendants be. Millions. Innumerable.
But here's the conflict, right? The source notes that as the promise grew in his heart, doubt also fought to get in. Because, let's be honest, Abram is old. Sarai is barren. The reality of their bodies completely contradicted the promise of the stars.
That is the tension. Great promises require gigantic faith. The gap between the promise, millions of descendants, and the reality, 0 children, was absolute. There was no natural bridge between the two. From a human perspective, it was biologically impossible.
And yet in the land of Canaan, God speaks again, "To your descendants I will give this land." And how does Abram react? The source says he fell to his knees.
Not out of fear, the source clarifies, but out of astonishment, asombro. He was overwhelmed by the scope of it. The pact wasn't just for him. He realized in that moment that his life was a seed. The tree would grow for generations, for history, for all of humanity.
It wasn't about him anymore. It was about something eternal. But, and this is part 7, the promise didn't fix his daily life immediately.
No, and that is a hard truth. The source lists the ongoing challenges. Years of infertility, hunger, uncertainty, conflicts with other peoples. The promise did not eliminate the problems.
And it's a crucial reframing. We often think if we are called, the path will be smooth, but the source suggests that every trial only strengthened their conviction.
It forged their identity, which leads to the literal change of identity mentioned in the source. God changes Abram to Abraham.
From exalted father to father of multitudes.
It wasn't a whim, it marked a destiny. Imagine introducing yourself as father of multitudes when you have no children. Every time he said his new name, he was speaking a prophecy. It is an eternal reminder that God's call always has a purpose, even when the evidence isn't there yet.
This brings us to the legacy he left behind. Part 8, the legacy of obedience. The source summarizes the core lessons beautifully.
Walking by faith is starting without seeing. Obeying without understanding brings blessing. And perhaps most importantly, God's promise surpasses human logic.
The metaphor the source uses is that hope is built step by step. Every desert and every trial is a reminder that God fulfills.
Abraham wasn't just a patriarch in a history book. He was, as the source calls him, a pioneer in obedience. He showed us that the true adventure of human existence begins when we trust the invisible and leave the known to embrace the promised.
So bringing this deep dive to a close, we have to look at the outro of the source material. It brings it right to the present day.
It asserts that the call is still valid today. The context changes. We aren't all living in Ur, but the dynamic is the same. God may not speak in an audible voice like he did to Abram, but the source suggests he speaks through dreams or through impossible situations.
The final exhortation of the source is simple. Trust, obey, walk.
It's a rhythm of life.
And I want to leave our listener with this provocative thought, echoing the source. The greatest calls always produce stories that change humanity. But they start with leaving.
So the question is, what is the you are holding on to? What represents your security, your comfort, your known? And what is the unknown that might be waiting for you if you're willing to listen?
It is a solemn and beautiful journey to consider. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the call of Abram.
It has been a privilege.
We will see you next time.